So I'm going to start with a quick introduction and a heartfelt thank you to Carol Aleman, who has agreed to reshoot some of her presentation, some highlights from it, because of our technological difficulties. We lost the video of the original session. But we are gathered today on the 24th of September.
2021.
And we are about to hear some about Carol's research.
Thank you, Jan. Glad to be here. As I begin to speak about the Historical Society in particular as a resource for local history and local historians, I'd like to point out my own views that the Historical Society should not be seen as an isolated unit. Sure, they're found often by the side of the road, frequently are closed, and they have a look of being unoccupied. Instead, for me, the Historical Society is part library, part newsroom, and part school resource center. They are a link to the past and to the present, and a potential for everything in between. For me, the Historical Society is both study hall and playground. So, what am I doing here? Well, about 3 years ago, I retired from my paying job. And it occurred to me early on that there wasn't a whole lot in the written history of Greenfield that addressed the Black population. And this seemed a huge omission to me. I had in the early 70s married into a Black family in town. And it just irked me. I needed to do something about that. And so I began at the Historical Society. I called up, I got an appointment to go in, and the next thing I knew, I was on the 3rd floor, whether it was cold weather or hot. The building was not heated in the winter, so that made it challenging. And I was pouring mostly through town directories, trying to figure out who are these people, with lots of silence and lots of absence in terms of indicators on my path. I was joined there by another researcher, Russ Percott, often, and he was working on researching Bill's restaurant. So I wasn't totally by myself, but it was a very exciting moment for me to start out on this path. So I am a relatively new researcher, but I have spent hours in the Historical Society and with its treasures. So what kinds of things does a person find in the Historical Society? Well, there is a variety. And I've brought a few items with me today that I'd like to pass out and ask the audience to give me a hand at identifying what these items are. Now, understand, please, that they are not items that will necessarily be found in a particular historical society, but they are items that might be found. So, with your permission, I will give everyone 2 items. Excuse me, Doug. Thank you. You're welcome. And I'll ask you just to take a glance at them for a couple of minutes and see if you can figure out what you have in your hands. These are items in my own collection, I might say, which is very limited, but for the project, researching the Black presence in town and in Franklin County. as part of this, I've also been working more recently with the Pioneer Valley History Network and UMass Public History Department on a project that's actually going back even further. My project was aiming at starting about 1850 and going for at least 100 years to see if I could collect all the names that I could find of folks who had lived in Greenfield. But this other more formal project, which is grant funded, will be ending soon, and I've been working actually with a team of about 5 people on it to see if we can find by looking further back. So you don't necessarily have to describe in great detail what you have in your hands, but I'd love to hear what you think you might have in your hands, and I can perhaps relate it to some of my research. Doug, would you like to go first?
Well, yes and no. The yes is sure. The no is really interesting, and so I'm still reading them.
I'm so sorry.
Things. So one is a death certificate from the records of death in the city of Greenfield, April 5th, 1882, Benjamin Putnam. And it records some very basic information. It's really clear that birthplace of father, birthplace of mother are blank.
Mm-hmm.
So the information about people born most possibly, well, certainly during a time when there were many people who were enslaved still.
Yes.
So whether that's the story for the parents or not, we don't know. But there are no records here of where Mr. Putnam's parents came from. He was born in Greenfield, Benjamin was, and died there. And
What was his age at?
he was 27 months, 2 days, so he died.
Oh, it should be
Oh.
reading 27 years, so
Okay.
many months, I think, and so many days.
Yes, okay, so, yes, he was 27 years, 2 months, and 5 days old.
Okay.
And the cause of death is nervous prostration.
Mhm.
I don't know what that means.
It's a little complicated. I'm not sure they really knew.
Yeah. Mostly they knew he was sick and died. And he's buried at the Green River Cemetery.
Thank you. And the other item?
The other is called When I Was Young, as told by Joseph J. O'Hare, August 17, 2007. And it's whether it was a formal interview or just somebody writing down the content of a conversation they had is at least not clear to me. It was somebody talking about what Joseph J. O'Hare was telling the story of what it was like when he was young living in Leverett.
Mm-hmm.
And talking about how his mother did hundreds of quarts of canning every year, and how they all bathed in the kitchen where the pump was, etc. So describing their life back in the day. It's not entirely clear what day that was. I'm going way back. There's somebody who was born in a big old house in Leverett, built in 1750, rebuilt in 1889. And so anyway, going back into stories of what it was like back when.
Yes.
The way that old people can tell young people a little more about their history.
Thank you. Well,
1750?
Yeah, but this is not somebody who lived in 1750. I mean, he's talking
But
about
remembering
the house.
about the house being in the family in 1750.
It's not clear. That would be one of those questions.
Okay.
There's somebody, it sounds like that, and yet, obviously, if somebody's talking to somebody in 2007, they would have had to have been alive a very, very long time. So
So,
there's a mystery there to figure out.
okay, so here we are in one of the moments of having a dilemma, as one has in the Historical Society, when you find information and it suddenly doesn't quite make sense. Yes, there are always going to be errors here and there, but thank you, that was a fine presentation of what you have. The first item, the death certificate, is the death of Ben Putnam, who was the son of John and Julia Putnam, who were connected with the Underground Railroad here in Greenfield. So, yeah, he lost his life at an early age, and I'm only partway through researching him. He was a foot runner, among other things. He ran at all the fairs, and he took prizes. He was very athletic. The second item, yeah, there's more on him to come, actually.
And that's the John Putnam?
That's the John Putnam in Greenfield, yes. The black barber, fiddler, peddler. Yes, he did it all. The second item is more difficult to understand. For years, I used to take the brother of my former mother-in-law grocery shopping, and as he reached advanced age, I would begin to ask him about his past, and that's something pretty much verbatim that I took down, because I loved his language and I loved his stories. So those often are not items you'll find in the Historical Society, but when you do, they're really great finds. So,
You want me to go next?
Lindy, would you? Yes.
Well, this is interesting. This is like clearly from a family record of both births and deaths of Mary Miller and John S. O'Hare, Sr. And it lists the births and the deaths of those families. Mary Miller was born the first year after the freedom, October 28th, 1866. And, well, I guess they had several children. And the last of these relatives that was in this particular family record of death is 1962, so, and it's ripped off, so I don't know what the O'Hare name was, but
Could you hold that up a little
I
bit?
can.
That piece came to me, by the way, from someone else. I have no idea how and why it was ripped, torn, but it's to me sort of a statement of, we have full Bibles in the Historical Society for a lot of people
Yeah.
who were affluent people in town, and for
Was
me,
this out of
this
the Bible?
is out of a Bible for this particular family. And it sort of speaks to being tattered and not as pristine.
No, but it's pretty fascinating to look at the handwriting.
Yes. And that is the family I married into.
Yeah.
So,
Anyway, so the other one, I don't know what it is, but it's pretty cool. June 5th, 1951, Aunt Lydia gave this to her niece or nephew?
nephews.
Yeah. It says nephew. I was trying to make a name out of that word, but it's nephew. And it's like a newsletter, right?
Sort of, yeah.
And Aunt Lydia, who's in the middle here, she clearly worked within both the church and the school. She's involved with the school system, and is it a Catholic school?
It is.
Yeah, that's what it looks
In
like.
Virginia.
Yeah, and it lists all the names of the kids that are in it, and then Here's the announcements of the church, so it's of the church in the month of June, in the grand year of 1951.
Very
So,
good, yes. That last item I found when I was working on doing estate work when one of the nephews, the last nephew, died, and I was entrusted with handling his estate. And I didn't know what it was at first, but I started searching, and she was being celebrated for, it was something like 50 years of starting a school for Black children and staying.
Yeah.
Teaching them. So there is one wonderful illustration also, photograph of her teaching a student wearing a suit. So,
Yeah, the suit, the,
Then we can maybe get some photographs of those.
yeah.
so again, that was the property, it was one single item in a household in Greenfield. And had I not had access to it, it would have disappeared like so much. The other item, yes, came from the Bible. And Bibles are, with those pages about, with births, deaths, and marriages, can be very useful, especially to genealogists. So, thank you. And Jan?
Well, the first thing that I looked at is an agreement to divide the proceeds of an estate sale, looks like. And it looks like it was amicable that 3 people, Lucy Rebecca O'Hare, Bessie Driver Washington, and Augustus W. Moon, all of Greenfield, agreed that they would equally share in the proceeds of the estate of Mary L. Driver, who died in 1935 and owned property in Sunderland. So this is dated 1949, so took a while
14
for this agreement to kind of come to being settled, but that's what I'm seeing there. The other is a packet of report cards, which I love,
Yeah.
and I'm seeing that they are for Joseph O'Hare. He was 10 years old in 1935, so born in 1925, obviously. It's the youngest one seems to be his 2nd grade report card, and then it goes up through high school. The main thing I noted was that as he went on in years, his absentee rate went up a little bit, and his grades went down a little bit as a general trend, but in general he was a good student. And a lot of A's and B's, and then eventually maybe more B's and some C's, but he was a pretty solid student. And
What subjects were they grading in 2nd grade then?
well, let's see, in the 2nd grade, it really isn't subject matter so much, other than in arithmetic. E is for excellent. It's not the lowest grade, but it's the highest grade. So he gets E's straight across for deportment. For reading, he gets an E+ in reading in one of the in the exam. There's first 6 weeks, second 6 weeks exam, third 6 weeks, and fourth 6 weeks. So at the midterm, he had an E+ on his exam. He got E's, straight E's in spelling. In writing, he had fair and good. He progressed from fair to good. In arithmetic, he was excellent from beginning to end. Music was good initially and then excellent. And he was promoted to grade 3. He's very interested. He showed a lot of interest. He was well prepared, and he conducted himself in the very good category. And in general, it says he's capable of doing better. Do they ever say anything else? I don't know.
Let's not be too supportive.
But it looks
Yes.
like he was a pretty bright kid.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you, Jan. That's all very accurate what you've explained. And the first document, the agreement, was an example of, was a reminder to me that yes, the Historical Society surprisingly often has wills and deeds in their files, and yes, that did relate also to the O'Hare family and those lovely report cards, which I think are such fun too, are for Joseph O'Hare, who is the same person who was in the interview, the nephew. So, like so many things, there are connections here. But to find each of these by itself, you might think it's not worth anything and toss it. And that's why history just begins to be so important once you can, and so exciting once you can start to make the connections. And yesterday, I'll close by saying, yesterday I was working at the Historical Society with a UMass student, and we were talking about a couple of women, females who I had identified recently, Jeanette Thompson and Jenny Thompson. And in 1880, both were living in a white household here in town, Reverend Loomis's home. Jeanette had been with the Loomis family and Mrs. Loomis's family before that, so for a total of 35 or 40 years. And Jenny in 1880 was living with the family. She died that year, and she was, I believe, 20. And I haven't been able to figure much out on that. So yesterday, Charlotte and I, my student and I, went up to Green River Cemetery. And I said, I have no idea where section 1 is, but that's where they're buried. So it's way around the corner. It's right on the edge with the river just down below, and it's like a little teeny bluff. And it's so extraordinary, and we found their graves.
Nice.
And we were able to read most of what's on them. We're going to go back. But sometimes that kind of moment where you're propelled from the Historical Society. We had been spending the day reading these large compilations of newspapers. That's my newsroom piece. And had found bits and pieces, mostly under the death column in the newspapers. We're always finding things like the old Bardwell's Ferry disaster, 18, oh dear, I don't know, was it 86? I might have it written down. In the disaster folder, which you have at the Historical Society, because you have church folders, disaster folders, you have all kinds of folders. It's worth going there, it's worth checking it out. And if you're lucky, you'll be like me and feel like it was my playground and my
Schoolroom?
No, it was playground and library. I'm close, right?
let's look.
She has to check her own work.
Study hall.
Study
hall, yeah.
So it's schoolroom.
You were pretty right.
We knew it was
You
school.
both
We
were.
were just.
You were zeroing in.
You know,
Like-
Carol, you talked about how we make connections, and the reason that I exclaimed about that date was not to question, was this person misremembering? Because as I then read it, he's not saying that was when Lucy was born, but just that the house was built in that year and then rebuilt in some later year. And the year that the house was built, 1750.
Mhm.
And when was Greenfield founded?
53.
1753. So this family was living in a
Great.
house that was here before Greenfield was here, when Greenfield was still part
Okay.
of Deerfield
Okay, so
or Sunderland.
they
or wherever
they were living first in Leverett,
Leverett.
right?
Yeah.
And then they came to Greenfield actually, I think around 1939 till they came later.
Right,
But yes, but that
But
house-
the basic idea is that that house was here
Right.
before Greenfield existed as a town, as
Yes.
part of
As an
Deerfield.
incorporated
Yeah,
town.
so it starts to, connect to those kinds of things too.
Yeah, it's true, and so many of the times when I'm looking at these documents, I think it's a natural thing, you get excited, and sometimes you want to find something that maybe isn't exactly there, and it takes
Yeah.
rereading and, just pondering it.
One of the things that occurs to me in reading through these things or listening to the stories is the wish to go back and ask the relevant questions to my family when they were around to ask them. Because you're having to grab all these pieces and try to pull them together, that if the family did that and gathered it, the stories would be more complete, obviously. And so thinking about ways in which we can today, because part of the focus of ECHO is making history and moving forward, learning from the past, et cetera, is thinking about ways we can talk with our families or share stories with our families that help to pull some of these things together.
And also the idea of preserving across the board that all lives have value, that all lives should be documented, celebrated.
And the danger of collecting material and having it fill your house up.
Definitely.
Which
That I got.
yes, which will happen, but of what can be preserved and shared, one way or the other.
I don't know if people do it much anymore, but scrapbooking is one of the ways of doing that,
Do you know that the
scrapbook.
Historical Society probably has, 60 scrapbooks
Uh-huh.
that people had
Donated.
Donated, yeah. And I have one of the members of the research group, Wendy, is looking at scrapbooks these days, and every once in a while she comes flying down the stairs.
Yeah.
I found, this is not news, I found something, you already know it, but I found it. And I said, wonderful, let's go.
It also raises the question, given electronics, you can store
Right, we can
but
scan
how
stuff.
long those will survive, we don't know yet. We don't know how well the technology, you think about things that are 200 or 300 years old that you can still read or hold in your hand, and whether what we store on digitally will still be available and readable. It's hard to know, but it's a way to do things without filling the house up.
Right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming back and being willing to reframe and retape. I've been very excited by both presentations.
Oh, thank you.
Very.
Thanks,
So
Lynn.
thank you.
My pleasure. It's nice, always nice to be here, and I always think of something new to say.
Good.
Great.
Okay.
Come back anytime.